Welcome Wargamers to the deep holds of Ea, because today we are talking about the Dweghom yet again, specifically touching on their subfactions. Now if you missed part 1, you're going to want to see that to kind of set up a lot of the preface for what we're talking about here. I left the link to that video in the description down below, and while you're down there, if you're looking to save 10% on all your purchases from Bellum, I have an affiliate link down there. It does go to help to support the channel. It would mean the world to me if you would use it. But as a very fast recap to the last episode, the Dragons of Ea history created a subservient race of slaves known as the Crafters. These are what we generally know as dwarves. Well, some of these crafters used their genetic memory to overcome their built-in servitude and overthrow their oppressors. And these warlike and aggressive versions of crafters dubbed themselves the Dweghom. Now, once they attained their freedom, they went on an absolute killing spree, hunting dragons and killing any dwarves who chose to stay loyal to their masters, but ultimately this just presented another problem. The Dweghom had no long lineages or method of governance that wasn't dragon installed, and the same genetic memory that led to their freedom also very much divided them as a race. And at that moment where the will and the shackles of the dragons were cast off, where the primordial god, known as war, was unleashed, that whole event was known as the Shattering. And that moment is instilled deeply in every single Dweghom. And even though the Dweghom as a people have near perfect memory, they are still limited by individual perspectives. Now obviously, if you have multiple perspectives of a single event, you can reach very, very different conclusions. And so today, that's what we're going to talk about. The 3 Dweghom subfactions that are really based on the perspective of how this group views the events of the Shattering. Essentially asking, what did that event mean for me and my people's identity? And this has largely fallen into 3 different categories: the clans, the ardent, and the tempered. All of these are equally Dweghom. They may unite, they might try to kill one another, but they are nonetheless branches of the same tree. So we'll kick it off with the clans because they are the most numerous race. They make up the vast bulk of the Dweghom as a people. Bereft of their dragon overlords and taskmasters, the everyday rank-and-file Dweghom have formed a fascinating little type of society. Essentially, they now view labor as punishment, or at a minimum, the work of like a peasant or a slave. Which, given their backstory, makes absolute sense. So in an effort to basically get out of that work, they're constantly trying to display their own worth or importance. The word for this in Conquest is Dweghom. It's sort of a way of defining an individual's weight both in terms of social importance and their status, and their achievements and accolades. Important Dweghom rise to the top and are given more prestigious, positions of power and better weapons, and they have to do less and less menial work, again moving away from that slave mentality, while the others remain in their lowly positions until they have achieved greatness or die on the battlefield. Now, honestly, this is not a super revolutionary concept, right? Hard workers and fighters go up their ranks. It's basically a meritocracy, pure and simple. From the lowly miner to the most prestigious high elder of a clan. However, there's a catch that makes this a bit unique, and that is their memories. That near perfect memory makes a meritocracy look a bit different, right? When there are centuries-long, perfectly kept records of you and your family's deeds that are always in an active bid for social and military currency, this is not a matter of pride and vanity. This is like very much a measure of worth and your deeds to society, rather than perceived merit. And because memory is so important, it's studied very deeply. It has been refined and turned into an actual discipline, and is a power known as Nomancy. It's a magic that can bind and judge a group of Dweghom together, and as such, Nomancers, those who wield the power of memory almost as an arcane art, are often seen as the leaders of the common folk. They're the ones who truly understand this kind of network that they've all created with one another. Now, what's troubling about this is that the origins of these societies are so deeply rooted in warfare and conquest that those tend to be the easiest and most numerous ways to gain Dweghom. So when you put all these pieces together, you have a rather heartless military meritocracy, where everyone at every tier is looking for ways to prove themselves on the battlefield, to rise in rank, have others work for them. They become a somewhat faceless military machine, but it's interesting because they still have individuality, like everybody has an individual merit. But that only means anything if your merit reaches a certain threshold, if you have enough Dweghom to be of note. So when they go to war, every soldier knows they will fight as hard as they can to gain a piece of something greater. And so that is the lore behind the clans. Now there are two more, and they're much smaller groups within Dweghom society. And these have a lot more to do with like the future of the race, who they are, how they're divided, that kind of thing. So we'll jump in with the Ardent. To put their perspective in a brief way, they see the birth of their race, the Dweghom, not at the time of the Shattering, but long before that, when the first dwarf tried to refuse to bow to his dragon master, but was forced to. We know that before the actual events of the Shattering, some Dweghom, because of their genetic memory, were trying very hard to rebel against dragons, but there was never much of a resistance because they were just so scattered. So these are Dweghom who see the fires and the spirit of rebellion as the true nature of their race, right? Like, this is what makes a real Dweghom, is that will to never be shackled or bow. Which, like I said, started long before the events of the Shattering, but was significantly amplified by it. So these are a very warlike sect who want to keep that fire within them burning. That rage and power, first unleashed by breaking War from his prison, was their gateway to freedom, and so it should be embraced as the purest form of the Dweghom race. They will often have their holds dig deep, deep, deep into the earth, near the old prison of where War was contained, and where the beast known as Destruction lingers. Here, foul, mutated creatures make their homes. It twists and corrupts things into these nasty monsters, and for the Ardent, this is a test. A trial to see if you can stand before the fires of destruction and war like your ancestors did during the Shattering. Are you strong enough to handle it? Because only if you can you truly claim to be Dweghom. And basically, to do this task, you have to go down to the deepest parts of Ea to feel the primordial powers flow into you and fight off monsters that it created. And this event imbues these chosen with an intensity for war that few can match. This is where you'll see a lot of, I believe, flame berserkers and such overcome by this hum of war. And so, bringing that more into a kind of simplified worldview, the Ardents are a faction that deeply revere their ancestors in terms of like their actions and the spirit of what they were going for. Those who resisted the dragons before there was ever even a hope of freedom. But they also revel in the untold power that their ancestors tapped into. It's made them have like a near like war fever. But these are ultimately a people defined by the past and the Dweghom who stood before war and lived through it. And the last group today is the Tempered, and as their name suggests, there are some cooler heads here amongst the Dweghom as well, or at least sharper, though they still make up a relatively small part of Dweghom society. And essentially their perspective is less about the past per se, like the Ardent, and more about the future. Right, no matter how we got here, right, creation by dragons, the Shattering, like no matter how you define what Dweghom is now, we are here now, and we as a race need to decide where we're going. In their minds, during the events of the Shattering, the intent of their forefathers was to channel the power of war to gain freedom, but ultimately not to set him loose. However, these older Dweghom, the ones who did the Shattering, got greedy and sapped too much power from the prison, ultimately leading to the events of the Shattering. So they're saying unleashing war was kind of a mistake. Now, That's not inherently a bad thing. I mean, they do have their freedom. The goal was ultimately achieved, but the Tempered see the works of those first Dweghom as very short-sighted, that they were all wrapped up with this desire for war and freedom and vengeance, that they went just a little too far. So in response, the Tempered seek to change the course of the Dweghom species, giving themselves wholly and completely to war, like the Ardent want to do, is an absolute recipe for disaster. It won't let us enjoy the freedom that we actually got into this mess in the first place for. And again, they look to the Ardent as great evidence of this, right? Infused directly with dark powers of primordial gods, they go out and they search for war to the point of self-destruction. And the Tempered see the way forward in revering the past, but attempting to change the course that has been set by their race. To understand the power the Dweghom have tapped into and study where it leads, but always keep it in check. And because of this, the Tempered have become the most preeminent mages and scholars in Dweghom society, often called metal mages, cue the guitar riff. They have perfected the mastery over the Dweghom environment and contributed to its development with arcane and engineering masterpieces. So as I do with all these videos, let's take a step back and talk about why is this so freaking cool, these three perspectives and reactions to something. I like the Shattering as a narrative, hook or tool, because it's a singular event in their history that's defined this race in several ways. The clans just want to go on with their life, right? Making so they don't ever become a slave again. It's good, but it's very short-sighted. It's very in the moment. There's not really much of a future to that society other than we have to keep fighting stuff. They're not trying to think about the future. They're not trying to do nation building. Then you have the Ardent, who view the Shattering as an almost mythological and religious moment, right? Something to be reenacted, a tone and worldview to be carried on, born in fire, going out and fighting everything and everyone. And then you have the Tempered, who are none of our history matters if our race gets ourselves killed by fighting everybody at once. And so these are three totally legit responses that you would see. Now, we do know the next edition of Conquest is somewhere around the corner, and that these subfactions will each be getting flavorful rules so that you can enjoy them in that way. So this is the perfect time to really think about the events of the Shattering, decide how you feel about it, and join one of those three perspectives on it. Each subfaction highlights an aspect of Dweghom society, but isn't dominated by it. So you can have a hold that has basically all the dudes you want to have in there. Go nuts. Don't feel like these have to be three, totally different camps. They can kind of blend together a little bit. Because remember, whoever the rake or the king is for your hold, he'll determine the standing of all of them. So there's still tons of room to create your own narrative and what your hold looks like and how its little ecosystem functions between these three huge power groups. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. What faction do you want to learn about next? I'm hoping to cover all of the factions in general before I go backwards, and then I'm going to start talking about the individual units. I think that would be pretty fair. So everyone gets kind of a taster of what the faction is, and then we'll go on to more specific things from there. But thank you so much for watching and listening to this video. If you wouldn't mind sharing it to someone who might be interested in Conquest, it would mean the world to me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.